what I haven't gone away, have I? No, I don't think so.
No, you're still there.
Yeah, what I want to talk about today is how issues like trauma and disassociation fit in with Pellin. And I think within that, I think it's important to see a certain, I guess, where Pellin fits. Because we are very much outside the mainstream, in the sense that we did not come from any of the customary professional academics roots. We just came from somewhere different. There are parallels. Alcoholics Anonymous came from somewhere very different. And we're generalist. That's a way we're even different from AA, in the sense that, you know, this is a general approach to life's struggles and fulfillments, to any of our own, we're a generalist approach that is not specialized. We're not even specialized in therapy. We're much wider than that. I mean, people can, so in a sense that we're not specialized, we don't necessarily have particular answers to problems like trauma and disassociation, depression and anxiety. We have a general approach to life, and then as those issues come up, then we have something to say about them. You know, we're not an organization that specializes in fostering. You know, there are people who do. There are parts of universities that specialize in fostering. We don't, although we've made major contributions to fostering. We don't specialize on substance abuse, although we have made contributions in substance abuse. Even going back, right back to the beginnings, we didn't stay in corrections. You know, we didn't stay working in training people who work in corrections, whether they're counselors, social workers, or probation officers. So we are it's not a very elegant way to say it, but I'll stick with it for now. We are sort of a generalist approach where we have things to offer. We have tools that can be applied to a number of different situations. Although we certainly have our roots, you know, we have had our roots here. As I said, in corrections, that's where the work started. So when we approach something like trauma and disassociation, we're not coming from a place that, I think I would say we're not coming from a place where we have specialist knowledge. We're not coming from a place where, even say some of the things we have specialized in, over recent years, I've certainly specialized in fostering. but we're not just in that particular professional category. So when we come at trauma, we do want to recognize that, you know, other people are specialists. Other people sort of specialize in that. We sort of want to recognize that, and certainly in terms of Pellin Truth Line, where we're saying we've only got a little bit of the truth. You know, we are saying that, you know, other people's who are coming up with new ideas about trauma or about disassociation, you know, we want to recognize, and we want to recognize that from the spirit of, you know, we've only got a small part of the whole truth. The whole truth is this big, we got this little bit. And I guess we encourage people to have a similar approach, or we demand that they understand that we demand that they understand that this is our approach. So if someone comes along with something new around fostering, around corrections, just to stay away from the what might seem more controversial or more adversarial approach if we get into trauma. And someone has come up with something new in the field of corrections or the field of fostering, we want to say, you know, that's great. But don't come in as if you have a great deal of the whole truth. You know, don't come in as if you've got 80% of it or 75% of it and expect us to accept that. Because we're saying that you've only got a small part, the same as we've only got a small part. And in my experience, that's not an easy road down to go down. The people who've got something new want to often claim something much bigger than just a small part. I think this needs to be sort of honed down more clearly over time. One way I sort of say it easily, we've got some things to offer that have something of a universal quality to them. And so they've got a lot of different applications. So we're very easy moving between, we'll just say those three, which in a sense are linked, you know, they're not miles apart, but correction, fostering, and substance abuse, you know, they overlap. But we're very easy moving between them. But we're also quite easy moving, which we'll today, moving into areas of trauma and saying, you know, we have this to offer. You know, we have a lot of experience in this field, because if you take those fields that I guess I'm saying, you know, two of them are our root work, corrections and substance abuse, and fostering is our most recent work. That is work that spans like 60 years. And so and in those three fields, certainly trauma comes in. Trauma comes in with foster kids, trauma comes in certainly with people serving time. And trauma comes in substance abuse, whether it's causal or part of the pathological process. So that sort of background. Yes, Elizabeth.
I don't know if I should. I have a comment on Pellin's sort of place in what Pellin has to offer, sort of the big medical model guys. Should I say it now or wait for later?
Oh yeah, no, I want some room. Certainly, if anyone's got questions or comments they want to make about this bit.
Well, I've got a quick analogy, which is that one of my friend's mothers is a midwife, and she ended up in the role of teaching some medical students. And what she learned very quickly was they had never learned what a normal birth looks like and what the range of experience a normal birth can cover. And so every time they would see anything that wasn't perfectly textbook, they'd be thinking of these dire diagnostics. And she had to teach them, no, there's a range of how things work. And what I've noticed Pellin does, and what I really love about Pellin, is that Pellin has the ability, contribution training has the ability to integrate people at even huge extremes of behavior and experience into a model of normal human variation. Instead of saying you have this diagnosis, you're over here, and nobody else experiences anything like you experience, it brings the person in and says, yes, this behavior is part of this tool, and you're just sort of at one far end of something that everybody experiences to some extent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. And that's, and yeah, I appreciate that, because that's what we're talking about, because in Pellin, there is not a category for someone who, I'm sorry, I haven't got that right. Take two. In Pellin, we are on a continuum, okay? I mean, it's the continuum that to me is really important. So someone who is having, well, the work we've been looking at here recently, and it, you know, I want to try and stay on my lesson plan again. So, you know, we are looking at trauma, but if you're looking at trauma, you know, what we've been talking about the low side of the pendulum and the extreme low side of the pendulum. Because on the extreme low side of the pendulum, you're looking at suicide. There's no question you're looking at suicide. And in Pellin training, there's a whole thing about when someone's on an extreme low, they're not going to listen to you and they're going to sabotage anything you say. So don't give them your best stuff if they're on an extreme low, but don't leave them alone. But wait until they come up a bit into the tolerable area or towards the calm, and then that you can deliver your best stuff. Because if you deliver your best stuff when someone's in an extreme low, this is quite specialized, a word I have wanted not to use, right? When someone's in an extreme low, if you deliver your best stuff there, they're going to sabotage it. It's just sort of something in human nature. when they come out of that extreme love, they will tend not to go to you, but to go somebody else. Because they defeated your best stuff when you're in love. In other words, it's a bit like a sucker punch, okay? And that's, you know, that's trauma, that's disassociation on a, you know, really just the same as evil. I'll bring it down a little bit. You know, domestic violence, which is another place, and Mary's the person who did it, so she's here, where the Pellin tools just went naturally into that world. And one in particular that, do you want to say anything about it, Mary? The life forces and domestic violence and material life force. You know, I'm your wife, that.
It's not at the top of my head at the moment, if you could continue.
Yeah, well, anyway, Mary's the one who did that work. And there's a particular application of the life forces to domestic violence that you developed, which is material life force. So if I'm into my material life force, squeezed out my caring life force, you're my child, you're my wife, I own you, I can do whatever I like to you. And that, you know, a way to have men understand that was to teach them the life forces. No, you don't own, they are not your possessions to do whatever you like with. It's a particular powerful application of the life forces. And when you were doing that, Mary, we didn't have the cardboard circles before the cardboard circles, which would make it easier to get across. But then that's a sort of, I think, you know, normal, your phrase, Elizabeth, normal human variation. Yeah, at times there'll be real extremes. And then we have something to offer, but in having something to offer, we're not saying someone who's come along with something new and someone who has a specialty in the field doesn't have a really serious contribution to make. And maybe a more serious one than ours. But we don't want ours neutralized, okay? We don't want ours neutralized in the sense that if we come up with something new, if we come up with a new sort of syndrome, a new diagnostic psychiatric category, you know, with one of our approaches, in a sense, using David's word, in a sense, has a philosophy instead of as a school of therapy, just taking that position for a moment. I think there's something that holds our field back. I mean, I have a whole litany of what holds my field of work back, because I feel another side of me feels we are way better. We have much more to offer in terms of human condition, where the human condition is, but we do these dumb things like being arrogant, like not being transparent, like diagnosing people too fast. Just those three, which make us look bad, make us look foolish. You know, that you can, yeah, cease.
I want to get more on this thing with domestic violence and what, how you're using the different circles, and what is it that, besides explaining that to them, what are some, I don't know, exercise, I don't know what task or whatever that they,
teaching the material straight to them,
Okay, but then do they, but then once you've explained it to them or taught them, what do they do with it? Do they do any kind of exercise with that, or do they do like Gestalt thing, or what comes next
Well,
after that?
yeah, I mean, you know, all of that, it's a point of introduction, okay?
Right.
It's getting, you know, I guess that a method is always to teach something first. The teaching comes first, and then the exercise comes second, like a paired exercise or a group exercise going all the way back, and then there's chair work. But one of the points of our approach, and I guess it's sort of a combination of me and David, is teaching somebody something first.
Right.
And as the work proceeds, applying that teaching to their circumstance, okay? So in other words, and this came up first very, very clearly, because I blush a little here, okay? I really appreciate the lovely things you say of the early days of Pellin, but you know, there were the moments when I'd blow up and I wasn't at my best, okay? And then that would be sort of satirized on the Friday night. Someone would play me not being at my best, okay? But so it's teaching someone something, then applying it to them second, rather than having them share the material and then bringing the stuff in, okay? I'm not quite getting that. Let me try and make that clearer. Okay, where it absolutely started, right? Haney Correctional Institution, British Columbia, was because what people in prison want to do, they always want to talk about their case. Over and over again, they want to talk about their case. And over again, they want to talk about the circumstances of why they're there. It's a bit technical, but it's the ground on which we stand. So they are defined as inmates. They are defined as, going all the way back then, juvenile delinquents or criminals. They are defined by that social work or psychology category. I came in, backed up by David, with saying, I'm not seeing you that way. I'm not seeing you as a case. I'm seeing you as someone you could learn about your life, okay? I'm seeing you as a student of your life. So it's teaching the material first and then having an exercise. And if the possibility is there, and because part of my trauma work, my very early trauma work, I'd sort of forgotten about it until I was telling Nikki and Mary about it in, you know, having.
Just
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry,
Anyway,
my
yeah,
internet went out.
Yeah, I'll try and, that's okay. I'll try and make this a bit brief. Anyway, it was an injection of something like methadone. I can't remember all the details of it. The psychiatrist was the person who, you know, had the medical responsibility, and I was the person who conducted the interview. What an abreactive interview was this drug-induced total recall, okay? So it was an interview that literally went on for 12 hours. quite an extraordinary thing. They were very, very innovative times in a very, very innovative correctional institution. And that was absolutely sort of trauma work. So, I mean, that was even way more intense than anything I've done since then, including chair work. So there's a sequence in that, you know, teaching first, then the personal application, then an exercise, then chair work if it's available. That would be ideal. And thinking that through, yes, I've sort of done that because I've done chair work recent years. You know, the last one probably 5 years ago, did chair work in a rehab facility. This was in Michigan. You know, doing chair work with a group of 40 people, all the residents, and the person who chooses to do the most personally experiencing of it. This is where it differs from volunteers to do that, and that just the same as the inmates in this correctional institution volunteered to, you know, after some extensive work with me, or the psychiatrist would volunteer that they would do an abreactive interview. I'm remembering way back then that we would not necessarily even suggest it to them. We'd let them hear about it. It came from them. I don't know if that answers your questions.
Can I ask you methadone? Did you say methadone?
I think so. I can't.
Oh, what was the idea of the medication?
The
How did it
medication,
move?
very, very clear. It was also called a sort of truth drug.
Yeah.
And the purpose of the medication was that it enabled this total recall. Yeah,
Oh my God, that's
it was quite an amazing program, really was. I think this a bit, little bit hard for me to say, but I think I had particular skills to run it well. And I think the psychiatrist wouldn't have wanted it. It was a bit too risky to take it wider. So I think maybe we always had that. It was a very innovative time, you know.
yeah.
But I think we always had the back of our mind. You know, we, in terms of the particular inmate, or in that place they were called trainees, in terms of the particular trainee, of course, incredibly involved with him, but and his family. But looking back on it, no, we didn't have an ambition to take it wider. I think it was without all the safety, and maybe that's where, you know, I got, you know, way back then I was terribly concerned with safety. You know, didn't particularly want to take it further. I think it did go to some other parts of the world. I know that. And we certainly got it from some other part of the world. But I think the probability of it going wrong with the wrong people, we probably recognized all the way. Yeah.
What were the tools that were you using at Pellin approach? What were the tools that you were using during the
Well, but looking
process?
back, that was before I had either Pellin or Gestalt. So to answer your question directly, what my framework was at that time was a sort of psychodynamic approach and a Rogerian approach. The other stuff hadn't come in yet.
Oh, wow.
You know, I probably 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, and it was definitely a whole lot of Rogers, which
Right.
also, in another way, put a lot of emphasis on safety and gentleness I think that particular approach, and what's called abreactive interview, I'm sure it'd be possible. I haven't thought about it yet. I'm sure it'd be possible to research, but I mean, there's no way would that work with anything like Gestalt. Forget it, you know. But you know, Carl Rogers. Well, in my view, Carl Rogers was the nicest of all the psychotherapy people. So there's a whole lot of gentleness there, whole lot of responsibility. Yes, see.
Could you go over those 4 things again? Telling or teaching was the first one. Your second was what? I didn't have a pen before.
No, well, the teaching is the first one. The second one will be some personal sharing. Okay. Then the third one, I guess, could be an exercise. And then the fourth one would be Gestalt work. So I guess in a sense, there's an increasing level of personal sharing and personal intensity. And it was in the context of that, I thought, oh, wait a minute. Then at this particular time in my career, there was even this 5th one, which is even more intense.
What's the 5th one?
Well, the 5th one was the abreactive interviews, right?
I think this could be confusing, Peter, that you're now talking about the stages of work in contribution training, because this is different.
So to bring that in, thank you. You know, the stages working in contribution training, I think, parallel that sequence. Maybe you were suggesting that, Mary. Not quite, but we call the stages of working in contribution training. So this is a sort of model of how we do the work. The first stage is focusing on strength and health. And you can always find it, always. That's our position. The next phrase is having an awareness of hurt, having an awareness of how we're hurting ourselves, or how other people are hurting us, or how we're hurting other people, or how we are around a lot of hurt. Okay. And yes, let me try and not digress. Then the next stage is a heightened awareness of the hurt, which is very much Gestalt. A heightened awareness of how we're hurting ourselves, how other people are hurting us. How we're hurting other people, and how we're around a lot of hurt. Around a lot of hurt is, you know, like, well, like working in a prison, like working at ER, like, you know, being in a war, you know, like being a divorced lawyer who's just around all these people's hurt. That's around a lot of hurt. So, strength and health, awareness of hurt, heightened awareness of hurt. The fourth one is small behavior changes. And that, in a way, is, and then the next stage, the 5th stage, is deep facing, and that is facing the trauma, facing the disassociation, facing whatever is the worst thing we have to face. In this part of our work, we call it deep facing. So in a sense, we are building up somebody's strength, including the small behavior changes, before we're going into the deep facing. We're not just diving into the deep facing. So we're not going quickly for a diagnosis or into the most heavy material. That's not our approach. We're building up to that heavy material. And then the final stage, which is as, contribution from her. And given, you know, as I said, there are a lot of different approaches to trauma. This is our approach, and with our approach, there's a lot of emphasis on detail and going into the detail of things and taking a lot of time. And the phrase I like to use and have used, it's all grist for the mill. I like common sense cliches because I think our field of work, in my view, doesn't know the strength they carry. And it's all grist for the mill, in a sense, is taking in everything that's happening, including everything that's happening, you know, in someone's life right now, taking in what is happening with someone's relationship with their teacher or therapist, taking all that in. So if there's sort of misunderstandings, issues of control, that's all grist for the mill. Grist for the mill. Grist for the mill means that nothing is irrelevant. That quite, and all of this work, you know, to some extent, timing. So, you know, the details and all, and grist for the mill can mean that, you know, you spend too much time on something that might end up being irrelevant. In my experience, that's not that big a loss unless you've got short-term therapy where you've got to be more concentrated. So even with trauma, our aim is to go into the details. Our aim would be to get into deep facing. Our aim would be to find a contribution from hurt from the trauma. You know, that to us is the most probable way to help somebody heal. But building in a whole lot of strength first, you know, because the two stages of awareness is someone really having their feet on the ground. And I guess, yeah, so that, and again, it's a sort of generalist approach. It's a normal human variation approach. But trying to not go off onto tangents here, you know, we do see those stages of working as a way to approach it. And then we have other tools that we can bring in. Because memory links and what memory links does to the pendulum is one, I think, very valid way of looking at what trauma and disassociation are. Anything about that? Nikki, do you want to come in?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Within all that, you know, including memory links, there's a lot of our approach that's about detail. You know, I guess detail. It's all grist for the mill is. And I guess that's, you know, that's the basic ethos behind Gestalt and humanistic approaches, taking in the whole person, not just taking in the problem, but I guess taking in the whole person. And in our approach, is taking in the whole person and how that person's life or that person's problems, how they fit into, I guess, what I would want to call the human continuum. Cynthia.
Actually, this is something I had thought of earlier with the whole human continuum, like when you were talking about domestic violence and the material life force. There's actually a lesser issue that would come about. Well, sometimes it would escalate to that, but one of the things I noticed is particularly men would do this, and is if a lot of times it was easier to get men into their material life force a lot of times than it was women, surrounding divorce. Not always, but I mean, I'm generalizing, but that's what I noticed. And I would say, so you could sit down a man with a calculator and say, this is what it's going to cost you to fight it. This is what is there. And, what should we do from here? But the one exception to this, and I didn't realize this was still part of the material life force until you mentioned it, is if she cheated on him. And it doesn't matter if he cheated on her, even if he cheated on her first, even if he had a pattern of cheating on her, if she cheated on him, he would get crazy. I mean, it was, and it happened often enough. In fact, then when I represent the women, it's like, yeah, he's mad I cheat, but he's been cheating on me for years. I know, I understand that, but this is just something that men do, because I learned that over in my, in my experience, 10 years, I did it for about 10 years. Well, actually more than that because I was a student, but it just happened over and over again. But it makes sense if it's the material life force. She's my property and she cheated on me. I suspected it was something like that. I said, I can't explain it. This is just something I've seen over and over again. And that made a lot of sense. And I was thinking about that in terms of, yes, that can escalate, but that's at a much lower level than, domestic, if it escalates to that, but that's something that's in the whole human experience that's present in, continuum, and it's not necessarily there. That's what made me think of that. So.
I think that we really, in terms of, presenting and developing the material, I think it's very important we've got sort of examples in the middle and not just the extremes, okay? Yeah, because material life force, if we just bring material life force into trauma, I mean, have a toddler and lose the Ellie or the Blanky or the Teddy. That is traumatic for a toddler, that Ellie's not there. Or we went to visit Auntie and we left Ellie there. Or we can't find Ellie. Ellie was an elephant, hence Ellie. That's sort of material life force. Without material life force, I crack up a bit. Material life force is the ground under our feet. And I think a pride in our work. We've got a really easy place for money. Okay, it's not as if material life force is sort of not as authentic as caring life force. That's not in Pellin at all. Which I'm proud of. you want to come in at all tomorrow?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was muted. There's been some activity around here.
That's okay.
uh, I'm thinking a lot about what you're saying, and I'm appreciating it. It's well, I can say as somebody who definitely deals with trauma and is that it's disorganizing. And I think here, I'll try to get my face on here. I think that the reason for that is because that ground under your feet is what I call like the core sense of self. My experience of trauma is not having an eye that knows, okay, I'm struggling with depression, you know, so I think that the way that people have been coming at me when I ask for help has not helped with the organization on the, you know, because I feel like my brain compartmentalizes. I'm like an octopus, you know, that has like all of my brain is in different arms of my life, but there's nobody at the central headquarters, you know. But that describes the DSM. It describes fucking diagnoses, and then you have specialists that work with the diagnoses, and no one is assuming or working on the idea that I am getting kicked around. I feel like a ball getting kicked around because there isn't the idea of you're at this end of the spectrum, but we're still going to talk to you in the same way as if, you know, you're there at headquarters. We're going to talk to your central headquarters and see if you can get just little bits and bites and pieces of true rest or one feeling of accomplishment. And that begins to, my hope is that begins to organize my experience of myself instead of me having, I think, a legacy now of feeling chopped up into different bits. And God forbid, even, you know, if you find yourself a specialist, you're in even more of a bit. So you're just in bits and pieces, and it can start to, you know, run a girl down and into the ground, because working really hard at fixing pieces, but there isn't something holding the whole picture at the same time, like, you know, together. And so that's what it feels humanistic and holistic in a real way to have this approach. What's interesting for me is that I know that I need to have a relationship with another person in order to use, like, I look at the manual and I think of how this is useful as a clinician to be able to apply it to, you know, like people in my work. But then I'm not just the president, I'm also a customer. So, and what I think what I want to say is the importance of the relationship. That even when you were mentioning before, abreactive therapy, is, the story, but not just repeating that same narrative with the same memory links, but having a different experience of going through emotionally with the matching affect to match your story and to share that. I could see how cathartic that would be, and that it feels like it's safety, that you have the message that there's a big chunk of time for you wherever you go, however deep. It's 24 hours or whatever. So it sounds really scary in one way, like, oh my God, how can you do that to somebody? But for me, it feels like, how can you just work on the bits and bobs when somebody really, really needs someone to take some risks in order for this whole piece, that is a person, to speak and to be listened to and witnessed. So the stuff at Esalen was very powerful for that reason. And it sure as hell has been lost when I look for trauma work for myself, specific, and also try to feel like I have more effective ways of working with trauma and clients, because there's a fuck of a lot more of it now than there was a year ago. I assure you. And addiction, and and I find that it's starting to piss me off. It's laughable to me that you're going to take somebody and throw your idea of, I specialize in, like I have a specialization, and what you say about saying we only have this much of the truth, we can only treat this much of you, but you are a whole. We are not claiming that we treat all of you or see all of you. So, but when you're saying, in effect, people who have been taught that they're treating the whole person by focusing on a specialty and a niche, I think that the message is really dangerous, which is, you are only this. You're this little piece. And so how it's presented, how you treat something, that I find it's really powerful. A diagnosis is very helpful to be able to find yourself on the map somewhere. But I appreciate what Elizabeth said in the beginning about, that Pellin is, and it's sort of like, I hope you hang on, that it's like just a question of severity, but it's not like you suddenly bumped into you're a member of a different club now because you suddenly reach 5 out of 7 criteria for blah, blah, blah. That just feels like it can be really, what's the word? The opposite of whatever helps with organizing and cohesion.
Yeah.
And the dignity of the person who's not fully known.
I think in terms of manual, and I think it's something I could enjoy fairly soon. I've got a sort of funny bad habit. I'm not putting in the first 2 paragraphs. What is the purpose of the pendulum? And there could be something in the early part of the manual. And we get at it in different ways, but just saying, you know, something really clear about the relationship and trust and compassion and empathy, and just, you know, because, and I think it's a danger when, you know, someone's been doing something for a bunch of time, you forget to state the first principles, you know. When I was training people in the London courses, I really used to emphasize, remember what it was like when you first went to see a counselor or a therapist. You know, you pick up the phone or you knock on someone's door that you've never spoken to. You know, we're in the field for a long, long time. We do good work, and you know, maybe we do quick work because we've been in the field a long time. But I think we can at times forget about that simple statement: relationship, 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 trust, trust, trust. And that needs to be in there.
Yes, I really think that hasn't been emphasized, and where there is so much over caution is to just be so careful about going deep.
Yeah.
It's like, oh fuck, that's not going to keep me safe. You know, it's like I need to not just go deep when I'm alone. So this is a risk, yes, but this is where the healing is. But the safety needs in place to know that nobody's going anywhere.
Yeah, sort of trust.
Yeah.
Timing, because then, you know, these are the stages of working in contribution training, okay? And we're pretty adamant about them. But, you know, the amount of time they take, the amount of time it takes, say, to get from stage 1, strength and health, to small behavior changes, to stage 4, you know, that can vary between half an hour and 6 months, okay? You know, and for someone who's presenting and particularly working with trauma, and the side of trauma I worked on, which was physical violence. I mean, you know, that's what criminals do. And yeah, if someone calls you up, and it's sort of not a big thing in America now, so sadly, slow down on that one. But it was sort of a big deal when, you know, someone on probation or parole to me would say, well, you know, you've always been straight with me, Peter, but I want to tell you I got a gun. You know, you don't sort of worry about your stages of working in contribution training, okay? Or when to go into content and when to go into process, you know, you move. But at the same time, you can, and I remember distinctly, and I've got to be careful how much time I spend in the past and how much time I'm making it applicable to what we're going through now coming out of COVID. But my first bit about strength and health, first lecture, I can remember it. I remember saying to this guy, he was talking about, you know, how bad it was, and he didn't have anything going for him. And I said, look, at 5 o'clock, I'm leaving. You know, at 5 o'clock, I'm leaving. Okay, I'm going back to a lot of stuff. I'm getting in my car and driving into Vancouver. You're here. You can handle this. I couldn't handle this. And it's got political ramifications, doesn't it? All the upper middle class and rich people who can't handle prison, so they're going to flip and give evidence against their colleagues, essentially because they can't handle prison. And that was when I first saw the strength he had to serve time that I didn't have. And that was, yeah, Cynthia. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was, I know it was important to me.
I was
And,
thinking about,
just half a minute. And initially it was not coming down on the category, and then it was juvenile delinquents, and way back then it was also called social deviance. Everyone had, yeah, sorry, Cynthia.
yeah, well, there's a lot of parallels between the stages of working you're discussing and the way Pellin seems to operate to more traditional. I'm talking about traditional medicine, before modern medicine. And one of the things I know, homeopathy has a bad name now, or not a bad name, but it's associated with more new agey stuff. But originally, homeopathy was the tradition. Like we talk about Galen and the Hippocratic oath, Hippocrates, of those people. What they would start with is the idea was that there was two ways to deal with medicine. It was homeopathy and antipathy. And homeopathy meant like, you treated with like, which is sort of, you build up somebody's strength. You build up the strength, you build up, with our natural things. And antipathy is you go against the problem. And it wasn't in traditional medicine, it wasn't you do one or the other. The idea was you start with homeopathy first, unless the problem is so severe that you have to act fast. Because the idea was that homeopathy took a lot longer, but it was gentler on the body, where antipathy worked faster, but it was harder on the body and more dangerous. And Western medicine now is I'm not saying that Western medicine doesn't do great things, but modern Western medicine now focuses almost entirely on antipathy. I mean, now they do some, like with diet and exercise and stuff like that, but the whole focus on, you're a problem. And it seems like that's what happened in the psychiatric field first, where that was always, in fact, I forget, it was Galen or Hippocrates who said, you only do antipathy when it either hasn't been treated or there's been such poor management by the person before you that it's become an emergency. And yet that's where modern Western medicine, it seems like psychiatry and psychology start with antipathy rather than with homeopathy. Well, and now, and like I said, now homeopathy is associated with a lot of things that are not really what it means. It means treat with like. So.
Jeez. No sound.
All right, I was going to say this is a
Right,
good
got it.
conversation, and I just did some qigong yesterday when they're talking about what you're talking about, using these natural methods to improve our health. I want to though also bring up something when you're talking about these different places you want to focus on, and one of them that I know in psychodrama we focus on is the role that person plays. That they have, almost like we were talking before about the husband beating the wife, people have some kind of belief about what a husband is, or what a wife is, or what a doctor is, or what their role is, anything. And they have some beliefs about that. And those can either be very good beliefs or they can be terrible. And when we were working with some young men who this was in Colombia, and they had been in the FARC, which was the rebel group. We did
What's
a lot of
sorry, what's the name?
the FARC. I forget what that all stands for, but it's pretty well known if you look it up. They were the ones that were rebelling against the government for 40 years, probably with some good cause, but it got bad. And these were young people who had been living in the jungle. And I don't know how this got set up, but we focused a lot on the roles and strengths and positive things. about them, gifts they had. One of the exercises was, and this works in prison too, I've seen it, where people write down different roles they've played in their life or are playing, like father, brother, son, teacher, minister, whatever, burglar, kidnapper, whatever it was, that they had. Now, we asked them to put those in a box and then take their time and look at each one and see if they wanted to keep that role, in which case they could hold on to that sheet of paper, or whether they wanted to get rid of that role. They wanted to throw it away. They were sorting this out. Later on, when we were done, a couple of the young men came walking up, and I kind of asked them offhand, well, what'd you think of the workshop? And usually I get, oh, good, great. This guy said, my life will be forever changed because I saw that what I was before, I don't have to be now. Like, wow. And I thought that was a real key, that and connecting it to a role makes it easier to part from than this is me, Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
I can say I don't want to be in that role anymore of somebody who hurts people or who's fighting. But he said, I can be a new person. And he was amazing, very smart young man. And I think that's something from that I've learned is another area to look at. What is their understanding of the roles they have? What, like people who do a lot of office work, do they feel like they have to have everything perfect? Does everything have to always be, this way or that way? Do they feel they have to be I don't know, they have to be beholden to their boss, or, what's in that role for them? What is their idea of that role? And that's kind of a way of going to what you were talking about getting some of their history without having any. They're the ones that are making the decisions without putting some kind of bias on the role. Am I making sense? They're the ones that are making the decision about what that is and what they would like differently. They're kind of setting some goals for themselves as that. And I think people get a lot out of that kind of analysis. At least they have. And even in prison, we do that in prison. The guys are weeping as they go through that, deciding they want to spend more time talking to their relatives or their sons or daughters as a father role or their wife. And anyway, it's just something that fits in, I think, with your model.
Yeah, I find that really inspiring, because what I started thinking about was something which I know personally. So I'm talking about Southern Italy. And study, in terms of studying it. I'm studying Sicily a lot lately. And I think that stuff about roles would just, and I know that, and I know it, people who know me, I love Southern Italy. I'm not romantic about it. I know it for, no question, I know it for. But yeah, I'm very deeply connected there. And I know it to some extent from the inside. And I think that stuff about roles and doing it the way you were speaking, and, because I feel way back, I felt my approach to Gestalt Hotseat work was a gentle approach, okay? because I wasn't working with very successful people in society. I was working with people who weren't successful. And the approach needed to be more gentle. I think some of what you're saying here, Cecil, feels like gentle psychotherapy. Now, gentle doesn't mean backing off anything.
Mhm.
It just means, and you know, that even just going back to Pellin ground rules that we read out at the beginning of each of these, it's, you know, looking after people so that they can go at their own pace.
I think finding the strength first in what is really powerful. When you were saying, you know, I'm leaving, I can't imagine surviving what it is that is your work in your life in prison, day in and day out. It's finding dignity in
Mhm.
the pain or in the shame first. And it's so often, you know, that we find ourselves in socially stigmatized places that the first order of business is to restore some dignity by finding the strength and where, in where you are now. So but also the roles, I could say for myself that I felt I had no business to be working with clients. So it was very difficult for me to feel right in myself as a therapist, which didn't mean I wasn't doing good work. It just meant it felt like shit to do the work I was doing because the head number I was doing with myself. And there's been a shift since then. And I think it's been because of the work here that there isn't the idea that I cannot be an enrolled therapist because I'm broken. So I have a very different experience of myself now as being in my strength, sitting in my therapist's seat again in a very different way than I have for years now. The way I try to take care of clients was, you know, to protect them somehow from what I thought was inadequate, you know, in me for showing up, not being able to show up for them. And so weirdly, there it is. It's sort of like build it, but the central operations headquarters is in the very place where I feel like was my greatest shame and weakness, is actually in the office and doing this role as therapist that I'm allowed to reclaim. And so that's a real turnaround, you know, by finding dignity in the very place where you feel the most that you want to hide or
And just
fix.
in the spirit of what we're doing here, in the spirit of transparency, which is the I'll use that word, obligation of the person who's most experienced to be most transparent, person who's got the most status to be most transparent. When I was training foster carers, and it was sort of like different settings, but you know, 3 to 6 weeks would extend over that time. I'd have these people for a bunch of time, okay. And even now I hesitate because I sit there, you know, an opening round, who are we, and you know, I'm 87 and I've been divorced 4 times. I would hesitate before I'd say that. It would go through my mind. I know some people are going to put me down for it. Or you would go through my mind. You know, and I would almost always be, you know, an older white middle-class male with a group of middle class, with a group of working class Black women. That was the dynamic, you know, they are the great foster carer in the main. It was hard to say that. I'd always, maybe I won't say it this time. But I think get it out and go through, you can, you know, some people will reject me, maybe some people will, you know, whatever. But I think it's the dignity bit. And also dignity as a whole complexity about fostering. And the whole, you know, no child in care wants to be called a foster kid at school. Okay. Among friends, among neighbors, oh, you're the foster kid. Oh, you're the one who doesn't have a mum. You have a foster mum. Even when that's said caringly. Oh, you're the little girl who's got a foster mum. Whoa, talking about taking dignity away from kids. You'd see it.
Could I add something? Oh,
yeah.
sorry. Because it reminded me of when I was in the maximum security prison at Coleman, and my co-leader didn't show up for some reason. So I was, and my mind just went blank. And so I said, well, just tell me, but they were complaining about why am I here? And I said, well, tell me why you're here. Wow. Did I get an education as people started, not only did they tell about their lives and what it was like, but they started putting together this whole sociological reason for why they were in prison, with the poverty, the discrimination, the lack of somebody pointing them the right way, that some disabilities in my, I mean, it was by accident the best thing I could have done, because it, by the time they were done, they were saying, oh, now I see how that worked with this, and then this, you know, you get what I'm saying? They started putting this all together for themselves as a group. And I was just blown away by their analysis. And I think, I don't know if this is true, but I feel like that's probably true for all of us when we go through that process. And we didn't just magically show up in whatever shape we're in right now. You know, whether it's however it is, but there were things that we had no control of that were part of our ecosystem growing up. And I think that's a really, for me, it's really important. And I imagine it is for a lot of people. It doesn't mean I don't have any control, but it does mean that I have a better understanding. So now I know what to do to work on, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
I just,
we've got to stop in a minute. I'd really like to hold on to this topic under a number of different titles
right.
for a couple of weeks. But, you know, I want to take what you're saying, but and also go back, the audacious, how, I might get it a bit wrong. Pellin and the Hippocratic Oath, okay? Because if you go, I've done a bit of reading on that. I love historical novels, and there's some historical novels about that. You know, the first thing he came up with was do no harm. That was your first responsibility. you know, which Bernard Shaw picked up, the British playwright, picked up years and years later when he wrote a play called Doctor's Dilemma, which was about how surgeons are too quick to operate. You know, that was a sort of scandal in England in, when would it have been now, you know, 100 years ago or something. You know, they just go for the knife, the way it was called. And then my understanding of it was, the next thing you've got to do no harm. And then the next thing you've got to do is there any way you can help the body heal itself? And yeah, I just like to put that in some sort of context, because you know, the question, how did you get here? That is sort of saying, you can in this place say who you are. There's something really important about that. I think there's, because go back to something, you know, Elizabeth said early, you know, the normal human variation, you know, we go along, we're all different sort of sorts. But also, just half a moment, how there's something about chopping clients or patients up into bits that does deserve a good hard look. Cynthia.
Well, actually, I had a memory link, and I think that kind of fits with this. My grandmother, she hated doctors. She, you know, she's very proud that she hadn't been to a doctor in over 30 years. And, you know, she had this thing about, you know, you're okay until the doctors get a hold of you. But what she said about this was really interesting. She says, well, you know, if I had a doctor like I had in Sweden, I would go and he, you know, she's in a very small town. He would look at you and know what was wrong. And now they just have to do a test for everything and a test for this and a test for that. But part of the reason he was able to do this, and I'm thinking about the Pellin and relationships over time, is that probably this was in a small town. This doctor probably delivered, you know, her and her mother, and maybe even, you know, her grandma, you know, I mean, that there was this sort of, so the doctor actually knew the people. And I think that that's one thing that's really lost. And even like with therapies and stuff and with specialists, you know, now, you know, a doctor, you go and, you know, you're a hospital and you're the knee in room 10, you know. I mean, there's I guess that happens. And, you know, my mom was a nurse and told me that that's how they would refer to things. And it just, you know, it's like, I'm not just a knee, I'm a person, you know. You know, but there's a certain, that the way things have come with specialties and stuff, you don't, and with insurance and all the stuff. I mean, I think there's something about the personal, somebody who knows you, you know, somebody who knows you and somebody who's been with you and been with your family and knows your whole circumstances. But
Yeah, because talking about those systems, and this is certainly a place where I'd like to take Pellin, and I guess the fostering thing might give me a shot. But I used to say, I can go into any prison. I used to say that very confidently. I could go into any prison. I could go into any police station. I could go into any mental institution. Doesn't matter how bad they are or bad reputation. I could find good people. There are always good people in the worst of situations. And I think there's something about how within these very difficult situations, because as soon as you say insurance and bureaucracies and psychiatric labels, and I guess it's the sort of the stages of working in Pellin organizationally, okay? You know, what in this system or this organization, what's good there? What's good there? Rather, it's so easy to knock them, criticize them, all of that. What's good there? What's good in that place? And it's not, there's nothing naive about that. There's nothing naive in Pellin. You know, attraction to hurt, callousing, just that. But that would be interesting to move forward. I've just got a friend who's just retired from a very good career running a very good organization, and it would be good to involve that person in this organizational stuff. We've got something to offer, because when you say she says, you know, you go into this maximum person, your co-leader didn't turn up. You know, my immediate reaction going back, talk about memory links, well, that means you've got to cancel it because you can't go in there on your own. It's sort of almost a little prison sort of rules and regs. I can't hear you. You've got to demute.
I said, I don't know why they let me in. You're right. They probably shouldn't have. But anyway.
They
Yeah.
couldn't have let you in. No, that was my absolute first reaction. Okay, and this going back, you know, I haven't been to prison for decades, and I haven't been to prison for half a century, for Christ's sake. But I had this immediate little memory. Oops.
You're right. Yeah. I keep going. Why that? How that possibly? There was another situation though that was terrible when they let me in by myself. So
Yeah. Okay, we have to stop there. Thank you so much.
a lot of food for thought.
Yeah. And anyway, we'll have a title for next week that's sort of just a continuation of this. And if, you know, people could bring examples on, because we've sort of moved away from trauma, we've sort of skirted the edges of it. That's why I'd like to stay with it for a bit, you know, trauma and disassociation to Pellin and the work of Hippocrates. Okay, that's the title of Sunday. Because he said the whole person. You know, he said the whole person and the body. And because they didn't have any, you know, they didn't have the medicines we have. But, you know, can you let the body heal itself? Can you let the psyche heal itself? And that's strength and health first. Strength and health first. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. I'm in Norfolk in England, and the sun's come out, and it's after 7:30 in the evening. We'll go the other way. Mary?
I am Mary in Rosarito Beach on another grey morning.
Okay.
11:30.
Going up the coast tomorrow?
Tomorrow, San Francisco.
Okay. Coming across the country, Cynthia? Oh, Elizabeth, sorry, Oregon. I missed out the state of Oregon.
I'm Elizabeth. It's a little after 11:30 in Eugene. I already have my example in mind for Wednesday.
Okay. Now we're coming across the country. Cynthia.
Cynthia, Kankakee, Illinois. It's a little after 1:30 and it's still sunny, but there's a few clouds coming.
Okay. Cease.
It's a little after 2:30 and it's really hot out right now. It's like 91 degrees.
Okay. Nikki, landing back in England.
Yeah, it's not 91 degrees, but thank goodness for that. Nikki, Wimbledon, but the blue skies come back.
Okay. Okay, watch this space and see you on Wednesday. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.